pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for coming out to our commission meeting tonight. The first item of business is to reflect on our commission reports that we have as commissioners this week. And so, Commissioner Moore, did you have some meetings you were attending?
I do.
You get your black book or your green book?
Oh, no, I have a blue flowery book. So, okay, well, tomorrow, of course, cooking corned beef, but that doesn't count for this. On Wednesday, I have a briefing, as well as I am serving lunch at the Senior Center for Community Champions Week. And then Wednesday evening, I will be attending the Shelton School District Superintendent luncheon, or evening interview, the community forum. On Thursday, I will be going to the chamber members luncheon, where Forterra will be doing a presentation. And then that's it for the week, other than fun stuff.
There you go. Thank you very much. Commissioner Olson.
Tomorrow I have Mason Transit Authority. Thursday I'll be at the Forterra presentation, and Friday I have a Board of Health Mason County Board of Health meeting. That's my week.
Okay. And Wednesday I will be attending a Mason County Criminal Justice Board meeting. Thursday also I will be attending the chamber lunch with the representatives from Forterra there. And if somebody doesn't know what Forterra is an organization that the Chamber, Green Diamond, and the City of Shelton are in negotiations on them coming to Shelton and looking at our city and giving us some ideas on how we might make our city a better place. So that's what Forterra is doing for us. So on Thursday, I will be attending, once a year I attend a Emergency Food and Shelter Board meeting, and so I'll be doing that also on Thursday morning. The Forterra lunch is at noon, and that completes our commission weekly reports. During our meetings, we have general public comment periods, 2 of them, and we have one now, and we give an opportunity for the public to weigh in on the activities that the City of Shelton Commission is doing, and so we welcome your points of view. If you'd like to speak, it's 3 minutes, and we have a sign-in sheet at the end of the table. And this is one opportunity. We have one later on in the agenda for another opportunity. So if anyone would like to speak now, I just need to look at that list on the end of the table, and I will. the list over there. Yeah. That was Vicky's place there. There. All right. All right. And if I'm okay, if I mispronounce your name, please forgive me. And if you don't want to speak now or you want to speak later, just you can say I'll wait till later. So it looks like Jonathan Hayek.
My name's Jonathan Hayek, and I reside at 8321 Shelton Matlock Road. And I'd like to talk to you guys about this Bronze Girls or something like that. The Bikini Girls place. I wish it would be taken out of town because frankly, it's a danger to our kids. I have 3 kids at home, and I will not take them by this place. I have seen them, seen the girl that runs it. She does wear a bikini top, and that is nothing that a kid should see. And being around the school, it should not be allowed. Frankly, this town should be a clean town. And that's why I ask you guys respectfully to take and remove this place. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate your comments. Next is Barbara.
My name is Barbara Hike. I live at 1219 West Railroad Avenue. I am a grandmother. I have 3 grandchildren. I like to go with walks on. I should be able to walk downtown with pride and dignity in this beautiful city. It has a very bad pimple that needs to be popped and removed. It is a bad image for Shelton. And I'm talking about the girls, the Bikini Girls Espresso stand. Right by the bank, the Peninsula Bank, right by a very fine restaurant that's being smeared because of it. It's just, I feel sad because it's a bad business example of what we really want in our town. And you can't beautify a town that's looking for the best or looking for the very worst in people and not bringing forth the best that we have to offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And then Mala.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mala Hike, and I, too, reside at West 8321 Shelton Matlock Road. And the Blends Girls is also heavy on my mind. I've been a waitress in this town for 13 years, work at the hospital. I've worked with children, fed them, cared for them, goofed around. And I don't think our town needs that kind of an example. I don't want to see our children with women half naked in the middle of our town. It's wrong. Something needs to be done. And respectfully, I'm asking our mayor and our commissioners to take this blight on Shelton extremely serious. What is that giving? What message is that giving to our sons, to our daughters? I have 2 nephews and a niece, age 4, 2, and 1. They're babies. They're just learning what life is all about. I ask you, if any of you are Christians, if any of you believe in decency, to please take this serious. Stop this garbage in our town before it starts. Not only that, we have sex offenders who have paid their dues, they've done their time. They are in this town. When they're registered, we know who they are. And what better excuse for them to reoffend than to have that in our town? Please think on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Would anybody else like to weigh in at this time? Then please come forward, and would you assign your name and address for the record, and that we can have you speak to this issue. So, right, just a name and an address, please.
Hello, my name is Megan Brown, and I live at 221 Southeast Weston Road. This is my first meeting. I'm 31 years old and never had any reason to come to one of these meetings. The school pool closure was probably my first time kind of being interested. And then I see a bikini barista stand being open right next to a sushi restaurant that I take my 4-year-old and 7-year-old to. I'm not sure if you've gone on these people's Facebook page, but sorry, I'm very nervous. They're not bikinis. They are nude, and they're barely covered, and they're very provocative. And I'm also not sure if you guys are aware of all the rings that have gone on, the prostitution rings, the drugs it brings in, the offenders. Everett, they're shutting them down and creating laws in Snohomish and Spokane and trying to shut this down. And unfortunately, it's happening in the Pacific Northwest of Washington. And Shelton is just a great place to add another really inappropriate stand. But this is our community. We need to set a standard of decency, and I'm not here to decide morality, but really in the middle of Shelton, right where our parades go, right where Key Bank is, where their grandma is, right where I get sushi, right where I go buy for Safeway. So I really think that we need to just consider shutting down the stand or really, really, really regulating what they wear, because right now it's pretty inappropriate. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Is anyone else like to speak? Please come forward, and you can just sign your name and address in here for the record. If you could just state your name for the record.
Julie Stanley. The first thing I want to say is I understand that these girls are allowed to be there because they're wearing bikinis, but they're not. They're wearing underwear, which if I walked around downtown wearing underwear, the city of Shelton probably wouldn't be happy about it. Also, if I went into any grocery store in the town of Shelton wearing underwear, I probably wouldn't be served. I'd probably be asked to leave. They're also wearing underwear while they're serving the public coffee, which has a lot of things wrong with that sentence. The windows aren't tinted. There are blinds, but they are open. I could see in when I drove by this weekend, which means my 9-year-old could see in. He also walks down Railroad when he goes on field trips with his class. They can see in. I don't think they should have to detour around that simply because of that. They don't have to detour anywhere else around Shelton. School bus routes don't have to detour outside of Railroad so that my son can't see in there. I feel like I should have the right to decide if he sees a young lady in her underwear. I feel like that right's being taken away from me. I also don't think that it should be allowed to have a business located right next door to another business that is going to be affected by it. It's no secret that her business at Osaka's is going to be affected by this business being here. It makes more sense to me that they would still have business located elsewhere because there's a reason people are going there. There's other restaurants that people can go to if they don't want to go to Osaka's. I don't think I should be expected to leave my son at home if I want to go to that restaurant. I'm not expected to leave him at home if I want to drive through Railroad or if I want to go to the movies or if I want to go to the bank. I should still be able to bring him with me and not have to worry about him seeing somebody in basically underwear. If I take him to the beach, he's going to see swimsuits, but he's not going to see women in underwear. And also I feel like if this license was requested as a bikini coffee stand, it probably wouldn't have been approved. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Is there anyone else that would like to speak now? Seeing none coming forward, I will just briefly speak to this and then we will talk a little bit more from staff's point of view on this. An issue like this came up a while back, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and this commission, put a anti-nudity rule in, I believe, for the city of Shelton. But legally, there's a line between nudity or scantily clad ladies and a bikini. And so, as far as I know, I will let staff talk to you about where we are right here. And what's on the website, unfortunately, I don't think it has to be there in the physical location. Now, that's my opinion from what I kind of get in my conversation with staff. Again, we can't personally say if we want something or don't want something. Everything we do as City Commission has to go under the legal rules and laws, and we have not listened to what the public is saying about this. I think it's a vast majority. I would emphasize the word vast majority that is not quite thrilled with what we have on the corner of Railroad and Fifth, I believe. And so, but my personal feelings, I have to kind of set aside sitting in this chair as the mayor of Shelton. So from staff's point of view, I turn it over to our city administrator, Dave O'Leary, to kind of talk a little bit about the legality of what we're involved in.
Yeah, this has to do with what's called a sexually oriented business. And we've been through 2 cycles on this in the city of Shelton. In my own career, I've actually been through more than 2 cycles, because there was another place I used to work where we went through one of these, and we lost. It was a decision to fight it, and of course the standards regarding this thing change all the time, and over the years they've just become more permissive in terms of what people can wear and how much they can expose in order to be able to do that. So what we did, we went through this the first time several years ago, is we had to define what is a sexually oriented business. In fact, we were obliged to have them. But what we could do is we could put them someplace other than on our main street. We could put them someplace that's more appropriate. And so by the time you got appropriate distances from schools and churches, and I believe those are the places where kids are, there was really one area up off of Olympic Highway North, off in one of the subdivision or one of the shopping centers up there, where you could have that kind of business. In fact, at that time there was one. An actual sexually oriented business. So this place opened up, and what we did was went to the city commission, expressed concern. The commission passed a moratorium on the establishment of bikini baristas. Trouble is when we got through with the legal review, bikini baristas weren't a sexually oriented business, and according to the best legal advice we could get, they cannot be a sexually oriented business because they don't show enough skin. That's bluntly what it comes down to. And so, we were obliged to do as much as we could, which means that if you wear whatever clothing it is, whether it looks like underwear or it looks like a sports bra or it looks like whatever, the standard is not whether it's bedroom clothing or whether it's swim clothing. It's just whether or not the appropriate portions of the body are covered or exposed. What we were confronted with is, do you tell people that they can't wear a swimming suit on Railroad Avenue? And if you did, could you back it up? And and based on the legal advice we got, we couldn't. So what this business is doing is they're taking it to the legal limit at this point. They are, based on what we've seen thus far, and based on other people's observations, not on the website, but based on what's happening at the business. We don't have any evidence that they're doing, that they're engaging in what is defined legally and constitutionally as a sexually oriented business at that place. So, any rate, so I am worried. I'll make a personal observation. I'm worried about the restaurant. That restaurant is a treasure in Shelton. It's a very, very good restaurant, have really good food, service, and that restaurant deserves to succeed. I would just ask that if you can't take your kids there, they do takeout. And so we go to that restaurant, and we've been going more, my family, since this happened, because we were afraid that that this other business would take their business down. And so if you can't, if you have to, if you can't get there otherwise, takeout is an option. If you can't get there, then you just can't get there. But I hope the rest of us will make up the difference so that restaurant survives. And then we'll see what happens with the other place. They tried to do it before. It didn't work in Shelton. I don't know whether it'll work this time or not. We have to act in accordance with law, even if we don't like it. So.
Any other questions or comments for this subject?
I think Dave did a good job of explaining the spot that we're in.
Oh, well, I meant questions or comments from us. we have the 3-minute thing, and so what we kind of do is we do it this way. You know, I greatly appreciate you coming out and saying what you've said. I have talked about this with our city administrator on countless times, and I've asked that if there was some way that this was not so that we could do it. If you have information where a city has legally restricted, greatly restricted, or whatever the situation, then you can easily contact us and tell us what cities really and what they're requiring, and could they say no, and because our legal opinion is that we don't have that ability to do it unless they break the law. So that's where we are right now. Again, be patient with us, be patient with the process. We love Shelton. We're here because we want Shelton to be a good place for adults and families and children. And so your comments have not gone unheard. We will continue to consider what you've said. So I think that's probably the best we can say at this time. Thank you very much for coming out. All right. Now we're going to move into another portion of our meeting, and that is to recess out of our regular meeting and open a public hearing. And this public hearing is going to be an ordinance that's going to be presented to us by Steve Goins, our Community and Economic Development Director.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I have 3 items tonight. The first public hearing is the proposed amendments to Chapter 2.76, which affects the regulation of our Historic Preservation Board. In summary, we initially were contemplating a more broad update to this section of code after having done some fairly in-depth analysis at staff level and with our city attorney. We've really pushed back on just how much changes we're proposing. It's pretty succinct number of changes that are being proposed. Mainly, we're proposing to change the number of board members from 12 to 7. We're softening the language regarding the qualifications of those members. Currently, there's a requirement for a certain percentage of the members to have professional experience. We're softening that to encourage or to make every effort to attract people that have that certain professional experience but not make it a requirement. And we're allowing for a mix of residents and non-residents within Shelton, but with the idea that most of the board, 5 out of the 7 members, would be residents of Shelton, which we believe, I think, is a better way to help represent the community's interest. The limits of the terms would be changed so it's uniformly 3 years. And we had provisions about the ability for the City Commission to remove members. That portion in particular posed some concern. There isn't really any description of what types of considerations that would be. What would the conditions be that would make the Commission want to consider that? It's not uncommon for an ordinance or for the bylaws for a body like this to have provisions for attendance if they're not performing their function, to remove them. Maybe if they have a conflict of interest because of some standing they're in with a profession. Unethical behavior might be a reason for removing a member, or just obstructive behavior. The ordinance language doesn't entertain what those different cases would be, and that would be something I think staff would be looking for the commission for direction if you want to add some sort of requirements for attendance or certain types of behaviors that might trigger consideration for removal, to add those before we adopt this formally. That concludes staff's report.
Okay, at this time, if there's anybody from the public that would like to weigh in on this subject, now is the opportunity. If not, then I invite my fellow commissioners to weigh in with their questions or comments.
So I got a couple questions, Steve, on the points where you're doing certificate of appropriateness. The first point is that you only talk about the historic register, and I wanted to see if we could add something so that the districts are also addressed in that, so that people are aware that the same rules would apply. You know, for instance, on D2, initiate and maintain the register. It doesn't address the districts. The other point is on when you're doing the certificate of appropriateness. In number 1 there, it says it's possible a concerned citizen could appeal the granting of a certificate, but it's not addressed at number 2, whereas if a homeowner, a private citizen couldn't come over and say he doesn't approve of that. I just wonder if we can clean that up a little bit. Is it really possible that a citizen could, interrupt that or have a say in it?
There's some case law on that very topic in various ways. A number of citizens have complained about the inability to appeal a building permit, and that's been before different bodies over the course of time. And in summarizing that, the courts have been sympathetic with the appellants because they did meet a certain time constraint that they had to make that appeal. But on the other hand, there's no obligation to give them notice that a permit has been issued. So it's really impossible for the appellant to understand that they had a timeline that they were trying to meet when they made their appeal. But the courts have stood behind that and said, well, we can't make that a requirement to notice the public every time we issue a permit that's appealable. That's just the way it is. And there might be some element to this that you might want to consider for a certificate of appropriateness, but generally speaking, that's part of the permit process, and we don't have like any other city, have the mechanisms in place to do any sort of noticing when those kind of permits are issued.
Any other questions or comments?
I just would like to, I would definitely feel more comfortable with some examples of conduct that would be unacceptable. I mean, I'm sure everybody realizes that they serve on the volunteer boards in our city at our discretion, but I'm also wondering if this should be included in all of the volunteer boards that we have, if that particular provision should be there. I don't know if it's on the other ordinances for our boards.
Without having those in front of me, I'd kind of be shooting from the hip. I believe there may be in our Parks Advisory Board some discussion of attendance as a requirement.
Okay.
I don't recall if that goes on to say that if you don't attend, 4 or 5 meetings in a row or something, that the commission may replace you. And I don't believe there's any similar type of provisions in the Human Services Committee charter. So maybe having a united description of what those conditions or behaviors might be would be something we could follow up on.
I think it would be a really good idea, and then I don't know if we need like a code of conduct that we expect from our volunteer boards. And this is just because we're talking about this right now, that it might be more predictable. I guess I think it's important to know for board members to know when they sign up and are appointed to a board what is expected of them.
Okay.
And that's it. That's the only. Mike had some good questions there too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that I think they should all be uniform. Like Commissioner Moore said, that no matter which advisory board or whatever, it should all have the same set of rules for removing a person, if that's what we're going to do.
Okay, at this point, I don't have too much of an opinion or comment on this particular board. My fellow commissioners have both sat on that board, and their comments are to be taken wisely, I would say. 1 second. So here's where we are, is if you are going to go back and readjust what you've written here, we probably cannot have a first reading of that tonight.
It sounds like what you'd like to see is some revisions that address the districts and the certificates appropriate within a district, as well as this code of conduct or description of what the expectations are. I can bring that back for consideration next week, if you'd like.
And there is somebody from the public who wants to speak about this. So, Mr. Cooper, if you want to come and sign your name, please, there. You can weigh in on this subject. Here, right here, this one. Or, yeah, I don't know. That's all right, yeah, yeah.
It's the very first one. The very first one? Bottom. It's 1866.
While we're taking a little break, I would just like to remind everyone that we do have vacancies on many of our volunteer boards, and the Preservation Board could use a few more people. It's a lot of work that they do.
We can put an amendment later.
Thank you very much, Commission.
Right. And you state your name for the record, please.
I'm Forrest Cooper from 409 West Railroad and 807 South 14th. And I will soon be, hopefully, a member of the Historic Preservation Board again. And I think something that came up, if you look at, actually, just 1 second. I think one of the things on this that showed a little bit of a concern to me when I was looking at the members of the board may be removed before the expiration of their term by a majority vote of the City Commission. There's nothing in there that talks about the board itself, like or the committee, you know, that you're sitting on, the board you're sitting on. Like I kind of feel like there's a process that's not quite, that's being forgot about. And that's kind of like, let's say you have somebody within a board that's disruptive. It kind of feels like there should be a process within the board there to where they could kind of address it, and then maybe the chair of the board is then able to take it to the commission with their findings and say, here we have kind of this issue that's going on, this person's disruptive, we've tried to solve it internally within our board. I kind of feel like there's a disconnect, like there's some portion that's missing. I don't know the exact solution to that, but I kind of feel like you got to really respect and remember that you're dealing with volunteers here, and that the actions that are taken to one of these volunteers can have a big impact on their ability to volunteer on any other boards within the city or the community, because it's all done so publicly. So it almost feels like there needs to be a due process there. You know, like I'd hate for the commission to have some sort of issue with a member on a board, and they think that that person's done something wrong, so they remove them. But in reality, they found they didn't violate anything or do anything that was actually required that removal. But now that person, who might be a professional or something within the community, has now been kicked off a board publicly, and nobody's going to hear why or what. They're just going to hear they were kicked off a board, so I don't want them on my board. And it might be people that are very passionate about volunteering. So I just want to kind of bring that up. That was one of my concerns when I first read this, was kind of like I feel like there's a disconnect there. Like maybe should there be power put in the board itself to be able to internally address the actions that are going on. And then the chair can take that to the commission, and the commission could then look at all the data and look towards the removal of the offending person. So does that make sense? Did I make any sense with that?
It made sense.
Either way,
it made sense to me. I mean, I think that might be something that we could look into, but I think that probably if you're on a board, and if the majority of the people on the board don't think what you did, or anyone did something, I beat myself here. I got to get rid of this.
Nice.
That I would think that would be what. And again, I read this stuff, but again, reading all these things, the fine print, I would think that's what we would do. But if that's been bypassed, so I guess what I'm hearing right is our city commissioners would be able to go to any board, if that's what the wishes is, and take somebody out of those groups that we think is not doing what we think they should be doing. Is that what? Could you want to clarify? Are you done with your comments, sir?
Just one more. I know that I would, as a volunteer of a board, I would feel way better leaving if my fellow board members voted me off rather than just the commission voted me off. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like the whole Survivor thing. But either way, I do want to let you know that my opinions here are mine of my own, is not a sitting board member. I don't want you to think that in any way I'm representing the Historic Preservation Board or anything like that. I am just purely my own person. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. And so back to my question, I guess, if the writing of this, the fine print of this is that the board doesn't have a say on a person's conduct. It's our opinion.
These types of boards can have a range of different activities. Some can get pretty controversial. We don't have a planning commission here, but in other jurisdictions and other places, it's pretty common for that to be a pretty controversial board. There can be a lot of pretty weighty decisions that are made. It's not uncommon for board members to be at odds with a commission or council when they're contemplating these things. They're doing the best they can. The idea wasn't to place people in a position where they might not be agreeing with a decision a commissioner or a council member would make, as much as they're not performing their duty, or they're preventing the rest of the body from performing their duty because they're being disruptive, or those types of things are occurring. It's not based on the outcomes of their work as much as the ability of the board to work through whatever's going on. And that would, as the example I cited, just not attending meetings can make it difficult for a board to do their work. If enough people decide not to come, you don't have a quorum, you can't move an item forward.
So you answered my question, I think, by saying yes, the majority of the board didn't have anything to do with it. It's if this commission somehow saw something or heard something we didn't like in any of these boards, we then would go in and pick out the person that we think probably isn't doing the job they're supposed to do, without the majority of that board wanting that to be done.
And what I'm understanding is that the desires to have a code of conduct that would sort of provide a framework for what types of activities would lead to a decision to remove someone.
Okay.
I would just like to speak to this because I have had experience on a board. I was the chair, and it put me in a really uncomfortable position being on this board, because I will tell you that all of my members threatened to quit if one particular person was not asked to leave. And so it's kind of like, it's not an easy thing. It's definitely not an easy thing. And in this instance, it was because of non-attendance. It turned out all right. I'm still friends with her. But I think in some instances, it may take a lot of pressure off the board to have to make that decision, because they still will be there working together, and it's very divisive, I think, in a situation like that. So I understand what you're saying, Forrest, but having been in that situation where it was kept internal on the board, I think it went on far longer than it needed to. So, but thank you.
So this is a public hearing, and we had somebody else in the public that wanted to weigh in on the conversation. So you have to come forward, you have to sign your name and address in on the record, and we would hear this one right here. Right here.
Those are separate public hearings.
Yeah, is this not this
No,
one?
that's general.
Oh, this is a different, well, no, this was the public.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this one's a public hearing, that one is. Yeah, I got the general one right here. I didn't even know we had two separate lists until tonight. Now I know. You don't need the phone number. And just state your name for the record, please.
Good evening. I'm Gerald Cummings. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, the only thing about this, what I've heard tonight that concerns me on this issue is we are talking about boards of volunteers. I've been engaged in community activity and volunteer work most of my life, and I appreciate the hard work that goes into these things. But remember, we're not talking about removing elected executive officers through something as grandiose as impeachment. We're talking about people who serve at the pleasure of the City Commission because you are the elected representatives of the people of Shelton, which means that really it's not up to the other volunteers to decide. It's up to the elected representatives of the people of Shelton to decide if somebody is not well representing the interest of the city. That's what you were elected for. We've trusted you to make those decisions, and sometimes there has to be oversight of volunteer boards. And I like the idea of having a framework that says here are some examples of behavior that would not be appropriate or that would not be acceptable. On the other hand, I think you should be careful that the language doesn't limit the commission. If in your judgment someone should no longer serve on a board for whatever reason, you are the elected representatives of the people. That's the quintessence of our republic. The people of the city are trusting you to represent them. And so it should ultimately always be up to the elected governing body of the people to make that final decision. And I wouldn't want to tie your hands with a restrictive code of conduct that says unless you have done this, you can't be removed, because to be honest with you, I'm sure that Steve would agree, you couldn't possibly foresee everything. We couldn't possibly think of every scenario. Something is going to happen that we didn't think to put on the list. So it's very important to me that the City Commission has that broad discretion. And honestly, I mean, if that broad discretion is ever being abused, you're the ones who are accountable to the voters. Boards of volunteers are not. You're the ones who have to face the voters come election time. So I wouldn't want to take that power away from you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for your comments. Sometimes things aren't as simple as we might like them to be. So we have something before us here, and it appears that we have a couple of commissioners and maybe myself as the other commissioner that thinks we need to rework this a little bit. And so I think we need to take this one back to the drawing board, and I don't think it's got to be done like in 3 days or anything. So I think it's better to do it right if we're going to do it. And so I would probably entertain a motion to put this under old business next week, if that's the proper channel for something like this that's come into the public hearing arena.
Don't need a motion.
Don't need a motion?
Let's continue the public hearing.
Point of order?
You'll need to decide whether you want to continue the public hearing or whether you want to drop it for now and then renotice the public hearing when you bring it back. Probably depends on how soon soon staff thinks they can reprocess it and bring it back.
Staff's recommendation would be to continue the public hearing and bring this back next week.
Okay, then I think that sounds good. So at this point, what we are going to do is, I believe, close this. Nope, not yet. Well,
You can,
oh, I see. We're going to continue through all of them. Okay.
no, continue it till next week.
Till next week. So we don't close this hearing. That's right. We're keeping this public hearing all open for 7 more days. There you go. That's the process. Wow. And return and talk about it again at our next meeting following staff's recommendation. So there is no first reading on this. So that meeting is not closed. Now, but we're still going back into our regular meeting, aren't we? All right. I got the fine print here, but sometimes it gets confusing. So, that issue we will talk about next week. We'll continue that public hearing. Okay. So, now, what we need to do is, we are still in a public hearing, but it's a different subject. I like Leslie Ann. Do you guys hear her talking? She's feeding me these little lines. Okay, so we're going to open a new public hearing. All right. And this is also going to be presented to us by Mr. Steve Goins.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This item is an amendment to Chapter 2052, which relates to our process for amending the comprehensive plan and rezoning properties. This is a more expansive update to this section of code. There's been a number of land use and court decisions that we felt we needed to address in this change and update. I think we added some features that make it simpler for an applicant to understand their role in our process as far as these changes, and we did a lot of cleanup here that we've been wanting to do actually for some time. In terms of the overall changes, there's several. I don't want to take the time to point all of these out. We discussed these in a prior briefing. I will say that this one has not been controversial. I've not received a single comment on these changes. And again, by and large, what we're trying to do is simply make our process more well understood and current with case law that's out there that has came along in the last 8 or 10 years. That concludes my report.
Any questions or comments?
I read all the way through this. And the only thing I'm not clear on is spot zoning is not allowed, right? Under 20.53.060, initiation of amendments, number 2, it says a property owner may apply for a site-specific amendment. Is that not spot zoning, or is that, I mean, we wouldn't allow it, obviously, because spot zoning is not allowed.
This applies to amendments that are there's not a lot of cases where this would apply in our code, but for a portion of land where there is not a requirement for an area to be looked at, it's specific to maybe a project, but it's consistent with the land uses that are around it, and it's not part of an annual update that the city is initiating. It's a part of an initiation by a private party, and it's usually associated with some sort of development activity that's occurring.
So like it's been left by itself for whatever reason, and then somebody around it wants to develop it so they can sort of change the zone to add that to the properties?
I'm reading through this, so I want to make sure I answer your question correctly as I can.
We need some elevator music in here. It gets kind of like the dead space, in between these things. Like Jeopardy or something, one of those little songs. Yeah, I can play guitar. Yeah, that'd be entertaining. No, I can't do it. Can't mix the two fields.
As we're going to have an example of this here in the coming weeks. There's different forms of applications for a change of zoning or change in the comprehensive plan. It's not uncommon for an annual update to have one or more property owners request a change to their property. And I think that since you've been on the commission, I think we've had one of these processes. This year, we're doing a mandated update, and we can contemplate an array of updates as part of that, and it's not uncommon for jurisdictions to reconsider a vast number of areas for different land use, to reevaluate how their land use is matching up with population projections, and do a lot of that analysis. That's usually done on an area-wide level. An applicant doesn't have to make that request because the city is sort of evaluating that as part of that larger process. But that's not typically what we do. Typically, we rely on applicants to make these requests, and these site-specific requests are what this is discussing, is where an applicant is asking the city to consider this, and it's separate from something the city's considering as part of a larger update to achieve other objectives.
That clears it for me.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Steve?
That was actually probably where my question was too. And so when you say to make it consistent with the adjacent property uses, I'm assuming that means legal property uses. It's not, I mean, conforming property uses. It couldn't be used as a tool to make a non-conforming area larger.
That's not the intent. Over the course of the process, you have to rectify any differences between your comprehensive plan and your zoning map so that that doesn't happen. What historically hasn't been clear, and case law has helped to clarify this for us, is when there's a request to rezone property and it requires a comprehensive plan update, when is that rezoning process, which is a quasi-judicial decision, different than a comprehensive plan update, which is a legislative act and has a different set of standards for the commission under that consideration? What the courts have said is there is no distinction. Both are a legislative act. And that's part of what we had to clean up here is making that consistent with our own process.
Okay, my concern is negative impacts on neighborhoods, on residential uses. So I suppose that would be addressed at that peculiar property, whichever property is applying for a rezone.
Right, those types of activities would be part of that evaluation. If land is being considered for a rezone, yeah, there'd be a great deal of discussion over whether that's appropriate considering the surrounding uses. And to a lesser extent, if there's not a zone change being requested, but a use that's conditionally allowed, you might have a similar discussion at the hearing examiner level, where the conditions of that permit might be you need to buffer that, or you need to turn the music off at 10 o'clock, or whatever the conditions might be.
Okay.
All right. If anybody from the public, we have this public testimony to speak about this. Here, if you want to sign on this one, we have both of them up here, to Marilyn, if you want.
There are 4 of them, Mayor.
Oh.
This is the third.
Oh, okay. So each one has its own.
Yes.
That's exciting. Thank you, Marilyn. You're educating me. Marilyn, could you state your name for the record, please?
Marilyn Vogler, 420 East Poplar. I have concerns about 2 particular kinds of omissions in this rewrite. The first has to do with transportation concurrency. And if you look at, I wish the pages were numbered, but if you look at section 2053.080, one of the items deleted was item F, under a written statement explaining the following where applicable. F used to read, how the project will meet concurrency requirements for transportation under chapter 17.07. That a similar thing was deleted from section 20.52.050, which used to have a section for decision and approval, and under approval, deleted was an assessment that, quote, the proposed amendment meets concurrency requirements for transportation specified in chapter 1707. The side note explaining why this was important says, it is premature to determine concurrency at the comp plan amendment stage. Your code reviews concurrency at the first project level application, such as preliminary plat approval or site plan. That reasoning seems to imply that transportation has a very limited reading to mean roads within a development or streets that might be provided where housing is being built. But I hope you're taking transportation to mean something more broadly interpreted. Transportation as in public transit, as in bicycle paths, as in walking paths, as in easy access to schools, trails that connect various parts of the city. As such, a developer may not have control over the entire process. So a developer could include plans for streets within a development, within a site plan, within a particular application, and not have a thing to say about whether the bicycle path would be connected to that, or whether Mason Transit Authority, which isn't even city-controlled, but is a county group, would be able to provide bus service. And I think the experience with the senior center and the length of time that it's taken to get regular bus service to senior center is important to keep in mind. 1707 says this, and this is a Shelton City Code requirement. After the adoption of the comprehensive plan, so after you've adopted the plan, the city is required to ensure that transportation improvements or strategies to accommodate the impact of development are provided concurrent with the impact of development. This is very black and white. You are required to ensure things that the developer may have no control over in initiating this proposal. So I hope you will not remove concurrency review from comprehensive plan and rezone amendments. I have a second one I'd like to speak to. I realize the buzzer went off. May I do that?
Certainly.
You have also deleted a section in section 20.52.060 that has to do with plans being submitted as a basis for a permit. This says it is not clear what is meant by plan. That's the comment. As I read this, and forgive me, I'm a grammarian and composition teacher, what this says is that if a developer submits a plan to you, and on the basis of that plan, you agree to rezone property, as it stands, this section says the developer has to adhere to the specifics of that plan. If you throw that out, conceivably, I could apply to rezone a big section of land for an amusement park, and I could submit a plan that says, I'm going to have Ferris wheels and a kiddie train and a swimming pool. And when I got to the point of developing, I can say, well, I've decided to do away with the train because I'm going to put a firing range on the back half of my amusement park. And if the plan is not specifically tied to that development, it seems to me you lose control over why you rezoned the property. So I hope you will reconsider deleting these things from the statute as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goins, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. The requirements for concurrency are not being diminished in this process. What we're trying to make more clear is the distinction between what concurrency requirements are at a planning level when you're talking about large land use decisions and a project-specific level. The current regulations sort of mix those up. It talks about a application for a rezoning, but at the same time mixes a lot of language about your project or your plans for your project. And the conditions need to be separated in this process. If someone is contemplating building a project, we will, as part of their approval, evaluate their transportation needs and concurrency requirements for that project, but they shouldn't be linked. And the example Marilyn gave of a application as an example for a amusement park, that would be one that would have an array of concurrency issues, particularly with transportation we'd want to address, but you don't address those at the land use decision because that application may go away and someone may want to put a business park or some other use in there, which has a whole nother different set of criteria that you want to evaluate. So the goal there was to distinguish between what concurrency is at a planning level and what it is for a plan and not to mix those up. in regards to the second issue, it's sort of the same thing. The description of a plan is intermixed in this language quite a bit, and there shouldn't be sort of a inference in the code that if you've submitted for a plan that somehow this rezone is going to entitle you to something that plan would allow, or a permit is granted as a result of this action. The idea is that you have a change in land use, but it doesn't specifically speak to what is being proposed. The plan would do that, and those evaluations would occur at that time.
Any other questions or comments from Mr. Goins?
Say that last part again. Concerning the at what point?
I'll read the entire piece so you kind of get the gist. This entire paragraph was deleted in this proposal. A plan, upon being acceptable as part of a petitioner's application for change, zone, district, or boundary, shall be considered as part of any special permit granted for the reuse represented, and building permits may only be issued in accordance therewith to the applicant or its successor, provided a covenant shall be prepared, accepted, and recorded to govern conditions of the aforementioned permit. It's kind of sounding like there's an approval there that hasn't been granted.
Right. So by eliminating that, then you've given yourselves back the power to, if something changes.
It's making it crystal clear that even if the applicant is proposing an amusement park as part of a rezone, we didn't approve the amusement park or any part of it. We approved the land use change. There's another process for evaluating the impacts of your project, and that's not part of this land use decision.
I think what we heard from the citizen is that we want the ability to hold the developer's feet to the fire whenever. What you're saying is if we got to take the bad with the good. So if the developer submits that in the plan, then we do a rezone, and then we're stuck with it, exclusive of a more elaborate process that we'd have later when the when the developer came in for his land use approvals, his subsequent land use approvals. Did I get that right?
Well, I think what I'm trying to eliminate is the perception that we might need to accept the bad with the good, as you put it. These are separate actions, and for someone to have the impression that somehow it's all one action, I think might be misleading. Or if someone wanted to challenge us on that, it would be a lot easier to be successful in that challenge if our ordinances were more clear and the demarcation in those processes.
Do we have contract rezoning in Washington where you can contract for specifics? Is it possible to do that within Washington or not?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, it's probably not then. Okay.
Steve, in the case of a planned unit development now, that's already gone through that process for the specific zones within the planned unit development. So they couldn't come back later and change that again, could they? Because they've already went through the planned use development once?
A planned unit development, we're getting pretty far afield here, but a planned unit development is an overlay that's allowed in a number of different zoning districts. You would apply for a planned unit development application. Typically, there's an arrangement where you describe what enhancements you're proposing, what open space is provided. There's usually some sort of nuances to the project that you process. An applicant, it's not uncommon for an applicant to come back years later and say, well, we want to revisit certain aspects of that planned unit development application. That's not a land use change. That's akin to a building permit where you've decided to amend the structure in some manner by doing an addition or changing a component of your structure, and you can amend that piece of it without going back to the drawing board and revisiting land use all over again.
Okay.
So in your professional opinion, there are safeguards in the existing rules and regulations that would make Marilyn's points acknowledged?
I believe there are. I have to compliment Marilyn for reading this very well. And their concurrency is a very common issue when it comes to larger projects particularly, and when you're making land use decisions, you want to ensure that that concurrency is met. Because in the recent past, Shelton hasn't had a lot of growth, concurrency hasn't been a big topic, but everyone hears about the traffic on I-5 every day in some of these other parts of the larger region where concurrency is a big issue and people are trying to get to work, and there's lots of transportation improvements that need to happen for that to occur. We have intersections in town that probably could use a little more work, particularly if growth occurs, and our plans do address how we're going to make those incremental improvements over time.
Questions or comments anymore? Well, at this point, do we have enough information to take a first reading on this?
Yes.
It appears we do. So at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing and return to our regular meeting and follow staff's recommendation to have a first reading of ordinance number 1867-0315 and place the second reading on the consent agenda for March 23rd, 2015.
Ordinance number 1867-0315, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending chapters 20.52 and 20.53 of the Shelton Municipal Code relating to comprehensive plan amendments and rezones.
All right. We are now going to continue having a public hearing on another subject, and Mr. Steve Goins is going to talk to us about this.
Thank you again, Commissioners. This is a draft ordinance establishing regulations for entering in development agreements. Again, revisiting the history of this process, we were audited by the WCIA, which is the Washington City's Insurance Authority, and this was one topic that they felt very strongly we needed to establish in our regulations. We had some back and forth on how to address this internally, but we wanted to bring this forward as part of this more comprehensive review that was part of that land audit, or that land use regulations audit. We had RCWs, the Revised Code of Washington, to rely upon their statutes that establish these criteria. We tried to be pretty straightforward in establishing a framework again for what can and cannot be in a developer's agreement. And we did have one comment on this particular update, but pretty minor comments. There's a number of requirements in here that may not apply universally to a particular project. In some cases, we referred to those as being as applicable. In some cases, we did not. It was felt that in the interest of clarity that we should add that as applicable language in all those cases so that if a particular project didn't have a certain nuance to it that their developer's agreement needed to address, that it didn't sound like that was a required item. And the second one was on 20.55.050. In Part B, it talks about who can enter this agreement. And the language describes currently the property owner, or as it's worded here, some other party with substantial beneficial interest in the property. We thought that might be more clear just to write someone other than that has financial interest. That I think has a easier tone to understand. And it also, I think, for the applicant makes it clear who needs to sign this and who doesn't. It's either someone that has financial interest or the city or the property owner themselves. If they have like a silent partner, for instance, that they're working with, that would be someone that would need to sign the agreement. They have an obligation to adhere to it. But it's not open-ended to mean maybe their neighbor or someone else. It's, I think, more clear language in that regard.
So are you saying you want to rewrite this?
We would suggest taking that language that talks about all other parties with substantial beneficial interest and changing it to financial interest as a way to, I think, clarify that.
Okay.
That concludes my report.
All right, questions and comments for Mr. Goins? And we do, if the public has, I know, Marilyn, you're signed in for this one too. On your specific sheet, just for this topic, I'll get to you in a second. Well, actually, we've gotten, you know what you want to say about this. Do you want to come up first and then we'll talk? We've been kind of doing that, so why don't you come up and just state your name for the record, please.
Marilyn Vogler, 420 East Poplar. This is a new chapter. I read the middle whereas, the third whereas. Lack of public facilities and services is a serious impediment to development of new housing and commercial uses, and I agree. Establishing development agreement provisions allowing project applicants to be reimbursed over time for financing public facilities could facilitate infrastructure development. And I thought, okay, they're being reimbursed. Somebody is going to pay them from somewhere. And then if you turn the second part, 2055.020, the specific things, Section A, Part 2 says, the amount and payment of impact fees imposed or agreed to in accordance, and this is, the agreement shall be consistent with policies. The amount and payment of impact fees imposed or agreed to in accordance with any applicable provisions of law, and reimbursement provisions, other financial contributions by the property owner, inspections, fees, or dedications. And I don't object to this. We need development. But I want to be certain that the process by which people, owners, property owners, negotiate development agreements that involve reimbursement of fees they have paid, or that involve special treatment with regard to inspection fees, other public monies. I want to make sure that process is really transparent so that we know when agreements are negotiated that will use public monies to reimburse fees. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to address that?
I can. Again, that's a very good comment, and I think there's two mechanisms in place here that can provide some assurances there. In 20.55.040, it talks about the process for approving the development agreement.
You want to give me that number a little slower, just, and I'll turn to that page.
20.55.040.
040. Okay, I got it. Yes. Okay.
The second sentence describes that a development agreement is approved by the Commission after a public hearing. So we would schedule a public hearing like this to describe what the development agreement contains. For a larger development agreement, a substantial development agreement like we expect to enter with Hall Equities for the Shelton Hills development, that would probably be preceded by months of discussion. I would anticipate that we would have that on the city website, giving the public ample opportunity to evaluate that prior to that process. Those provisions would all be inclusive as to what those arrangements include. Yeah, we think that's important for the public to be aware of what those considerations are.
More questions and comments from Mr. Goins?
As far as the question about reimbursed over time for financing public facilities, are you talking like latecomers agreements in that case?
Like latecomers agreements, it could be an array of different types of improvements. Again, these developer agreements can get pretty complex. Perhaps the developer is improving a park and dedicating it to the city, and they want included in the agreement some way of being made whole for making that contribution to the city, and how that's all agreed upon is part of the larger process. But those are the example of the types of things that a developer could expect some sort of compensation for.
I will say that I read this not just once or twice, but about 3 times, and then I called Mr. Goins earlier today and had him tell me everything that it said, and this is not the actual developer's agreement. This is just setting the groundwork for us to enter into those type of agreements. And would it be fair to say these are like some ground rules?
That's fair to say.
Okay. So it's a lot of stuff here. And I feel comfortable after my conversation with Steve that this is a good thing for the city of Shelton. So, any more questions or comments? Mr. Olson, you got anything else? Okay. So at this point, do we concur that this is probably a good thing for the city of Shelton? Okay. All right, let me get my little points. I'm going to, at this point, close the public hearing and return to our regular meeting. And what we'll do is follow staff's recommendation to have a first reading of ordinance 1868-0315 and place the second reading on the consent agenda for March 23rd, 2015. Could we please have the first reading?
Ordinance number 1868-0315, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington relating to establishing development agreements, adopting new Chapter 20.55 to Title 20 of the Shelton Municipal Code.
Have my fellow commissioners read their consent agendas, and are we ready for a reading of the consent agenda? Could we please have a reading of that consent agenda?
Consent agenda. Vouchers numbered 85352 through 85483 in the amount of $682,975.56. Payroll warrants numbered 73192 through 73365 in the amount of $626,505.51. Commission meeting minutes from study session of February 23rd, 2015. Hotel Motel Advisory Committee reappointments for 2015. Mr. Dwayne Wilson, Ms. Annette McGee, Sky Kim, and Maria Kim, terms ending December 31st, 2015. Historic Preservation Board reappointment. Mr. Forrest Cooper, term ending December 31st, 2018. Timberland Library Board of Trustees reappointment. Mr. Dennis Leverage, term ending December 31st, 2020. And Materials Testing Services, Construction Testing Laboratories Incorporated, authorize the mayor to sign and city administrator to make necessary budget modifications.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
I second that motion.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The agenda passes. We have no old business on tonight's agenda, but we do have an item under new business, and that will be concerning the Angleside Booster Pump Station site work, and our city engineer, Mr. Mike Michael, will present that to us now.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. We'll try and make this one pretty quick. As you recall, several months ago, we had the commission authorize and sign a contract for construction of the factory-built station, and this is for the improvements up at our Angleside Reservoir to better make use of the volume that we're already storing up there. The last part of that work is to actually do the site preparation work and take delivery and install the station when it's completed. The station right now is being manufactured, and we're expecting delivery shipment, actually I should say, late next month, early into May. We had 5 bidders bid on this portion of the work. Cayman Excavating here locally was our lowest responsive bidder at $261,591.34. And after review of all their documents, staff is coming forward and recommending to the commission that they award the contract in that amount to Cayman Excavating.
Questions or comments?
Just that I'm glad after all these years, we're finally getting a local contractor that's getting a lot of work around here. That's really great. He's been doing a great job. And
they've been doing pretty good. This is the 3rd or 4th job in the last year that they've been successful on.
Seems like for years we never had anybody bidding on these large jobs like this, so it's good to see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I believe that we are in concurrence that what we would like to do is request that this contract with Cayman Excavating LLC is placed on the consent agenda for March 23rd, 2015 in the amount of $261,000. I think I have a misprint on this piece of paper here, because that's 261 million, and I know that's not right. So let me go back to my.
I changed my mind.
Yeah, I think this might. I think I'm not going to blame anybody. I think somebody pushed the button a little bit one too many. So let me. What is the exact amount on that, Mike?
$261,591.34.
No, that's what mine says. I thought it was millions. So anyway, and it authorizes the mayor to sign and return from the contractor. So maybe it's getting later. I'm getting old. Okay, so I guess we will place this on the consent agenda. Thank you. All right, next is an administration report. Mr. O'Leary.
Just a couple things. My week is going to be pretty busy. I'm beginning to work on our retreat upcoming on April the 3rd. We'll be talking about that tomorrow morning with our department heads. Also, as we get closer to closing out the year end, we want to be ready to work on our performance measures. And it's a thing that we've participated in the prior years to see how we're doing relative to other communities. And anyhow, so we'll be working on that system. There's a new system from ICMA that gives us access to more information, allows us to be a little more strategic in terms of what we look at and put our time into. So that concludes my report. I don't think anybody else has got anything to report on that tonight.
I had a question also. Is it fair to announce what we are going to be doing in conjunction with the Mason County Transit Center on meeting somebody? Has that been finalized yet or anything?
I have not yet heard. I've communicated with the office that you asked about.
Okay.
And I have not yet heard back, but I probably we're okay. So.
We're probably okay. Well, we'll announce that anyway. Santa Claus is coming to town. No, just kidding. Okay, that concludes the administration report. Any other final general public comments? If anybody would like to say anything about anything, this is the opportunity. Seeing none, any administration final touches?
Touches, Mike.
Got a quick one. We got a house cleaning item coming next week. Basin 3 funding package that the commission discussed many times and approved a couple weeks ago. There's a requirement that the action the commission actually took be documented through a resolution. So we'll be bringing back a resolution next Monday to actually make that officially the case. So.
Okay, Steve?
We would like to bring forward our contract with Forterra for the downtown visioning process for consideration next week as well.
Okay. All right, our next meeting will be Monday, March 23rd at another evening meeting next week at 6 p.m. in the evening due to a Transportation Benefit District public hearing. This meeting is adjourned.